I think the more international attention and support is given to peace and stability here in the Taiwan Strait, the more deterrence this provides Taiwan. And in effect, the stronger the case for peace and stability becomes here in the region.
Hello again, and welcome to Perspectives with Neilo, a regular podcast that brings you news and views from around the world. You can find all of our past episodes on our blog site at pwneilo.com or by searching for Perspectives with Neilo on your favourite podcast app. In this episode, we bring you part 2 in our mini-series on Taiwan's 2024 presidential election, and we focus on the ruling Democratic Progressive Party and their presidential candidate, William Lai, or Lai Ching-te. As we mentioned in the introduction to our previous episode, this election outcome will likely have profound implications for Taiwan, as it will set the tone for how authoritarian China, who claim Taiwan as their sovereign territory, will advance their expansionist agenda in the future. The Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, were founded in 1986, a year before the end of martial law. They are one of the two major parties in Taiwan, the other being the KMT, or Kuomintang. We will focus on the KMT's presidential candidate in the next episode. The DPP has traditionally been associated with economic innovation, safeguarding human rights, as well as promotion of Taiwanese nationalism and identity. Their insistence that Taiwan is a de facto sovereign state infuriates China. The incumbent DPP president, Tsai Ing-wen, is the country's first female president and was re-elected for a second term in January 2020 with a historic 8 million plus votes, the largest number of votes for a presidential candidate in the country's era of direct presidential elections. Presidential candidates in Taiwan are not allowed to run for a third term, so current Vice President William Lai has been unanimously selected by the DPP as the party's 2024 presidential candidate. Our guest in this episode is Vincent Chao. He is the Director of International Affairs for the DPP, as well as a Taipei City Councillor and spokesperson for William Lai's campaign. We met him on November 14th to talk about William Lai's background, his policies on energy, foreign relations, and much more. So Vincent, it's great to meet with you and chat with you, and you're very welcome to the podcast.
No, thanks for coming to Taiwan. I think it's great to have you guys here reporting on Taiwan. There's a lot to share. We are in a full-thrown election right now and soon to be election day, basically. So happy to have you here and happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you very much. And it'd be great to talk with you a little bit about the DPP's candidate for the upcoming 2024 presidential election. Can you tell us a little bit about William Lai's background before he entered politics?
William Lai has an interesting background. I think most presidential candidates, as well as presidents in Taiwan, have come from very much legal backgrounds or have PhDs in various studies and so forth. Now, he's a former medical doctor, but he grew up really in challenging circumstances. He grew up in a small town about an hour outside Taipei. It was a coal mining town, and his father was a coal miner who unfortunately had passed away in a mining accident when he was very young. So he was brought up by a single mother with a number of siblings. And I think that informed his life perspectives. I mean, he often says that the biggest legacy that his father left him was being able to appreciate people who grow up in challenging circumstances. So this idea of a more equitable society is firmly ingrained within his philosophy of life, essentially, yeah.
And he entered politics around the mid-90s, I believe. Is that right, in Tainan?
Well, that's right. Actually, he entered politics because of the Taiwan Strait crisis in 1995, when China had started lobbing missiles over the Taiwan Strait in response to Taiwan's first ever direct presidential election. And China's attempt was to intimidate the voters of Taiwan to vote for somebody else. Unfortunately for China, unfortunately for Taiwan, the pro-democracy candidate, Mr. Li Denghui, won the election. But this inspired his entry into politics. So he had, again, been a medical doctor in a prestigious National Tsinghua University Hospital in Tainan. But after seeing China's actions, he said that, well, I need to do more to protect this country I love. And he decided to hang up his medical coat and enter politics.
And he became Tainan mayor. He was Tainan mayor from 2010 to 2017.
Well, he started at a very local level. So he ran for National Assembly member, and then as a member of the legislature, and then as mayor of Tainan. And after mayor of Tainan, he became our prime minister. So he really kind of put himself through the paces, successive roles from a local to a central government level. Now, obviously, he's vice president and running for president.
And for this upcoming election, he was the only DPP candidate. In other words, there were no DPP contenders or for any earlier primaries or anything like that. What does that say about his level of support in the party?
I think people coalesced quite early around the fact that he would be the DPP nominee for this year's candidacy. As you say, there was no other nominee that ended up challenging him for either the chairperson seat or the presidential nominee. And I think that represents, to a large degree, the DPP is very united around the idea of his candidacy as well as his vision for Taiwan. So there is no schism, as we say, in the DPP compared to many of the opposition parties we see today.
And what would you say are his key policies, the things he's very passionate about?
It's actually quite interesting because his views on politics are very much informed, again, by his upbringing. And so, on the foreign affairs and national security front, he's committed to this idea of consistency and pragmatism. And that he has inherited from President Tsai Ing-wen, which over the past 8 years has really shown the international community that Taiwan is not only a responsible stakeholder, but we are a vigorous advocate for peace and stability here in the Taiwan Strait. So President Tsai Ing-wen has engaged in his policy essentially boils down to we're going to stand firm to our principles and we're not going to provoke, but neither are we going to back down. And so this basically revolves around the idea of democracy, and that we're going to hold fast to this idea of Taiwan as a full and open democracy, and we're not going to back down in response to Chinese provocations and intimidation, but neither are we going to provoke. Neither are we going to rock the boat, so to say. And that is basically what steady and principled leadership is. And President Tsai Ing-wen has engaged in that in the past 8 years, and Vice President Lai Ching-te has made quite clear that these are policies and a general philosophy that he will continue if elected. I mean, he's made quite clear that on Cross-Strait, the status quo will be preserved, that there will be a continued adherence to the four commitments under President Tsai Ing-wen, which is essentially encapsulates the status quo. As well as the idea that he will continue to strengthen not only our military deterrence, but also our partnerships with like-minded democracies around the world. Now, I think where he is really going to make a big mark is on the domestic arena. I've talked about foreign affairs and national security for a bit, but I think his past experiences really prepare him to resolve problems and to solve the issues that many Taiwanese people here face today. This idea of salaries not keeping pace with the cost of living, high housing prices, this idea of bridging the divide on education, about taking care of our young people, making sure people have the confidence to start families. I mean, all of these are part of his policy agenda, which has been called the National Project of Hope. And the National Project of Hope precisely aims to make Taiwan a better place, not only for our young people, but ensure that people across Taiwan are well taken care of by government. So, again, all of this is informed by his quite unique upbringing, which is we really haven't seen kind of in the political spectrum in the past.
Okay, I guess one of the other domestic challenges that a lot of countries have is power and energy, and the green transition and so on. And historically, the DPP have supported what you have called a 2025 nuclear-free homeland, and I believe that some recent comments by William Lai suggested that the potential reactivation of nuclear power plants in an emergency situations might be back on the table. In other words, in the case of a potential blockade by China, fossil fuel supplies may not last forever, and there has to be some contingency. So can you clarify for us what is William Lai's position on nuclear power, and what are his plans for Taiwan's transition to green energy while being resilient against blockades?
Well, I think it's 2 points. The first one is that it's a done deal. I mean, the fact that we will be a nuclear-free country soon, and this has been a policy that was started under previous Tsai administration or current Tsai administration, but will be continued under a Lai administration in the future. And this was a decision made after the Fukushima disaster in Japan. I mean, myself, I was a journalist back then, and it was basically a cross-political support for this idea that we would transition away from nuclear. I mean, the construction of the fourth nuclear power plant was halted during the previous KMT administration, not during the DPP administration. So this really had bipartisan consensus. and we will continue this move towards a nuclear-free homeland. Now, at the same time, however, the second point is that I don't think any government would take options away from itself, particularly in a crisis scenario, which we hope never takes place. Yeah. But for example, if God forbid there is a crisis scenario, I think all options on the table to ensure a stable power supply. And of course, our nuclear power plants would not be dismantled, but mothballed for that purpose. Now, in terms of the green transition, this is very interesting because this is something. So, nuclear power used to account for about 8 to 10% of our power mix. Now, that has been entirely replaced and then some by renewable energy under the Tsai administration. So, our new renewable energy production is over 10% right now, up from the 0 point something percent we saw about a decade ago. Mm-hmm. And that will continue under Lai. And so the hope is that, the plan is that we will reach about 60 to 70% renewable energy by 2050. And that would pave the way for carbon neutrality by the same time period.
So while under President Tsai, the compulsory military service term for Taiwanese has been increased from 4 months to a year, starting in 2024, critics say that Taiwan's military still needs a lot of improvement. Does Vice President Lai have plans to address the critics on this topic?
Well, absolutely. I think nobody disputes that President Tsai Ing-wen is taking the right approach on our defense. I mean, let me give a couple examples. For example, our defense spending has gone up 1.78% to about 2.5%. Conscription has gone back from 4 months back to 12 months. We've engaged in a sustained transition to asymmetric, utilizing Taiwan's geographic advantages to pursue agile, survivable, cost-effective capabilities. I mean, we've engaged in effective reforms for our reserve system, as well as the training program regimens for our new trainees. I mean, all of this has been hallmarks of the Tsai administration. Now, Lai will continue that. I mean, all of this will be continued with urgency, because we do these things not because we want war. I mean, far from it, exact opposite. We do these things so that China, our biggest military threat, never feels that they have the confidence that they require to engage in a military contingency scenario over the Taiwan Strait. So we do all of this to avert war, to deter war. And this is precisely what Lai Ching-te will continue in his next 4 to 8 years in government if elected.
So there will be additional attention on improving the military then?
Absolutely. I think the general trend lines that you've seen over the past 8 years, which again are inclusive of everything from budget to training to conscription, will be continued under a Lai administration. And
some announcements have been made about partnership with the US and troops going to the US for training. Is that part of the strategy?
So the U.S. has a long-standing partnership on security issues with Taiwan that stretches back decades, since the passage of the Taiwan Relations Act in 1979. I was a former diplomat stationed in D.C., and the breadth and scope of our security partnership with the U.S. has been very consistent over past years, and it has, I think, increased both in the scope and frequency of exchanges in recent years because of the increase from the threat of the PRC. Now, with that in mind, of course, I think we will continue to see sustained growth in our security partnership with the United States in the interest of keeping peace and stability here.
On the topic of relations with China, then, as you mentioned, my understanding is that the CCP refuses to talk to the DPP unless you agree to the 1992 consensus or renounce Taiwan independence, which is one of your party's core values. On the other hand, the CCP and the PLA continue to ramp up pressure, sending, as you mentioned, more and more aircraft into your ADs, warships around your waters, military drills around the island, cutting cables to your outlying islands, incessant cyber attacks, all the time building up the pressure. So my question is, what is William Lai's strategy to diffuse this increasingly tense situation?
Well, let me say to start, the DPP charter does not have pro-independence as one of its core tenets. There was a resolution passed in 1999, the Resolution on Taiwan's Future, and this had replaced prior conceptions of Taiwan's either this idea of independence or else with the idea that Taiwan is already a free, open, sovereign, and independent country called the Republic of China, essentially. And this is the status quo. I mean, this is an idea that's firmly enshrined within our Constitution itself. So either whether it's President Tsai Ing-wen or Vice President Lai Ching-te now, I think both adhere to this idea of the status quo, and the status quo will be continued under future DPP administration, which again means that Taiwan is already a sovereign independent country. There's no need, simply no need, to redeclare independence, and our former name is the Republic of China. So that's to start. Now, with this in mind, I think we have to understand and appreciate that it is not Taiwan who has changed the baseline over the past 8 years. I mean, many people talk about the visit of Speaker Pelosi to Taiwan, and China had reacted very, very strongly to that. I mean, they've engaged in military exercises, missile tests, economic sanctions, and so forth. But then we have to also keep in mind that past speakers had come to Taiwan before. I mean, in the 1990s, Newt Gingrich, Speaker of the House, had come to Taiwan. China, I think, had one or two sternly worded statements out. They did not engage in economic sanctions, military exercise, and so forth. So what changed? I mean, certainly Taiwan didn't change. Certainly the U.S. hasn't changed. I mean, speakers had come in the 1990s, but China's changed. And so we have to realize and understand that as we talk about the evolution of not only cross-strait relations, but really this geostrategic situation we see in the Indo-Pacific today, China's changed immensely. China's ambitions have changed. China's leadership has changed. China's basically view about their role in the world has changed immensely. And that is what we should be prepared for.
But it is cranking up the tension. And so my question really is, how do you diffuse that tension? How do you take the wind out of the sails so that, things aren't on a knife edge or appearing to be on a knife edge all the time?
Well, I think principled cross-strait leadership, like I talked about. I mean, we're going to stand our ground. We're going to hold firm to our principles, our values. But at the same time, we're not going to provoke. We're not going to intimidate. We're not going to respond in a way that escalates tensions. That's, first of all, basic principle. But really, most of all, what we can do to deter conflict from taking place revolves around two central tenets. The first one is ensuring sufficient defense deterrence. Defense deterrence is absolutely key. And this is why, again, defense spending has gone up, reserve training has been reformed, and so forth. But the second issue is international partnerships. I mean, Taiwan is a country of 23 million people. China is 1.3 billion people. I mean, I don't think any country... these are pretty lopsided odds, Yeah. But if we can stand together with democracies ranging from Ireland to Europe to the United States to Japan, Australia, democracies around the world, and with the realization that Taiwan does stand on the front lines, as does Ukraine, as does many other democracies, in terms of resisting authoritarian expansionism, I think the better off Taiwan becomes. I think the more international attention and support is given to peace and stability here in the Taiwan Strait, the more deterrence this provides Taiwan, and in effect, the stronger the case for peace and stability becomes here in the region.
Do you think potential projects like the CCP announced Taiwan Fujian Development Plan, which they recently announced, are sincere attempts by the CCP to find a way forward? Or is there something more sinister in there?
I think China's actions on cross-strait and the word sincerity normally don't go well together. And I mean, I'll put it this way. Their ambitions towards Taiwan could not be more clear. I mean, President Xi Jinping has launched a new era of on Taiwan, this white paper, I think about a year and a half ago, that lays out very, very clearly, I mean, their ambitions towards Taiwan, which is that unification is the only way forward, peacefully if possible, but by force if necessary. And everything they do on Taiwan should be seen through that context. So regardless of whether we're talking about this test case in Fujian province, or the Boral Forum, where they try to have many political heavyweights from Taiwan go over, or this media gathering that they hold on an annual basis where they invite Taiwanese media outlets, or their local exchanges. I mean, all of that should be seen through the prism of China doing the things that they feel they must do to achieve political outcomes. And that's not to say that these exchanges must be opposed to by nature, but it means that we must be clear about their intentions, and we must have clarity about what they plan to do and respond accordingly to that.
And what, in your view, would they need to do to start re-establishing trust?
What would the Chinese need to do?
Yeah.
What would the PRC need to do? Well, first of all, I think what would be helpful is if they agreed to reopen dialogue between our semi-official bodies. So we have this body called SEF, the Straits Exchange Foundation. They have their body called ARATS, the Association for Relations Across the Taiwan Strait. And these are semi-official bodies, so they're not government bodies, agencies, but they in the past have been responsible for conducting or at least having exchanges across the strait and restarting that level of dialogue would be good. I mean, Vice President Lai Ching-te has himself said that there are many areas that we could potentially cooperate. I mean, we face a common threat from natural disasters. I mean, there's a series of low-level cooperation on, for example, Coast Guard, law enforcement, and so forth. And I mean, just having many of these exchanges start, I think, would be helpful. Yeah.
When it comes to trade, some governments around the world are advocating a de-risking and diversification of trade with authoritarian regimes like the CCP because of their economic coercion tactics. I noticed that Taiwan's total trade with China is in the region of about 25%. In terms of economic security, is this a concern? And if it is, what does William Lai plan to do about that?
It's absolutely a concern because 25% excludes Hong Kong. If you put Hong Kong into it, in the past it's about 41%, and it's gone down slightly to about 37% in the past year or so. So, I mean, we're a liberal economy. I mean, we're a free and open society. Government cannot tell businesses who they can or cannot do business with. I mean, aside from sanctioned countries like North Korea and so forth. So we have to provide the right incentives for market diversification. And this is precisely what President Tsai Ing-wen has tried to do over the past 8 years. She started with the new southbound policy, which is restarting our trade and investment relationships with Southeast Asian countries. We've continued on to building, for example, trade agreements with the United States. The 21st Century Trade Initiative is the most significant trade agreement we've signed with the U.S. since 1979. We've engaged with the UK. We've engaged with Canada. We're just in the final steps of finalizing an investment agreement with Canada, which would go leaps and bounds in encouraging bilateral investment. So these are the precise measures we need to take. We need to create trade incentives so our businesses can think about new opportunities away from the Chinese market, and this will be continued under Lai administration.
In regards to the upcoming election, currently polls are showing William Lai in the lead. However, there's talks about a potential of a pan-blue alliance between the KMT and the TPP. If the KMT and the TPP were to agree a successful alliance agreement, would that concern you?
I think not only myself, but most Taiwanese people are tired about hearing about this alliance because it's been on the cusp of a breakthrough for the past 2-3 months now. And every day there's new shenanigans that could pop up. Regardless of this person saying this or that person saying that. And I mean, again, it's a marriage of convenience and not a marriage of values. And that, again, I think is the biggest problem with this so-called alliance because they had come together to try to fuse a policy platform and they realized they disagreed on just as many platforms as they agreed on. And so I think many of the Taiwanese people are tired of politics in general. Like they want to see governance. They want to see good governance. They want to see policies. They want to see a roadmap and an action plan and vision for the future. And these are the things that we've been trying to do throughout this election. Now, obviously, I'm a partisan voice here, but I do think that I represent many Taiwanese people who say that they're tired about hearing about this marriage of convenience. And regardless if they come together or not, I think that's beside the point. People want to see a competition of policies and values.
We are hearing also, though, that the TPP is attracting the younger demographic, which in the past would have supported the DPP. Does that concern William Lai? And again, how can he reclaim their support if it's true?
Well, I mean, yes. I think it's true that the youth vote used to overwhelmingly support the DPP. Now, we've been in power for 8 years. The DPP is seen as a lot more establishment than it was 8 years ago when it was a party of, more rebels and reformists. But that's the burden of governance, and you have to deal with it. Now, I think William Lai has made it a priority to reach out to young people, and we're engaged in 3 different tracks to win back the youth vote. The first track is that outreach. So of all the presidential candidates, so there are 4 major presidential candidates today, William Lai has engaged in the most university town halls, university forums. He's reached out to the most young people. I mean, he holds gatherings with young people here every day, listen to concerns, talk with people, exchange ideas. Number 2 is policy. He has the most comprehensive policies for young people. I mean, his very first policy was on reducing the educational divide between private and public colleges and universities. I mean, throughout his National Project of Hope, his policy platform, I would say probably close to half of his policies are geared towards making life better for young people, whether in terms of education, housing, so forth. The third part is values. And I think more and more young people are realizing that the opposition candidates simply don't represent the next generation of values that we should hold and appear to hold as Taiwanese. For example, second place runner-up right now in the polls is Cohen's, a former mayor of Taipei. He has flip-flopped 4 times on this issue of whether he supports same-sex marriage. He initially said he supported it. Later, he said on the referendum issue he opposed it. Then he said he abstained. And on 4th time, he started accusing this person of asking him who he supported of being a stooge for the DPP. So there are different values, whether we're talking about same-sex marriage, whether we're talking about diversity, multiculturalism, and so forth, where the DPP does present a lot more of a consistent picture and a comprehensive picture. I mean, again, Cohen's has said misogynist things against women, dreadful things against women. He said dreadful things against immigrant communities, minorities. I mean, I would shudder to think that he represented Taiwan on the international stage.
So in terms of the representation and the running mate of the main candidate, that announcement will be finalised, I presume, in the next a couple of days or week. Can you make any comment on William Lai's running mate at this point?
Well, I can say that it will be released soon. So this week here in Taiwan, we're focused on the at-large seats in the legislature. The next week, on the week of the 20th, in fact, on the 20th itself, we will talk about and unveil the running mate.
So final question then is, William Lai has said that he wants to build partnerships with democracies around the world. What is William Lai's message to maybe smaller countries who might have great empathy for Taiwan, but who might also feel vulnerable to the economic coercion tactics of authoritarian regimes? What is the message to those countries? How can they work with you? How can they help Taiwan?
Well, the message, I think, is quite clear, which is democracies are strong when we stand together. I mean, we see the inroach of authoritarianism everywhere in the world, whether it's in terms of Russia and Ukraine, whether it's in terms of China, whether in terms of the authoritarianism, far-right movements taking place in many countries around the world. I mean, all of these are danger signs for democracies, and democracies need to stand together, need to band together, need to respond together, and we're better off for it. So, again, I mean, Ireland's a small country, Taiwan's a small country, but together we can do a lot. And I think that's precisely what we've seen over the past few years in terms of partnerships with democracies really yielding benefits, not only for Taiwan, but for stability around the world, here in the region. And the more we can do in that respect, I think the better off all of us will be.
That's Vincent Chao from Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party. He is spokesperson for William Lai's campaign, as well as Director of International Affairs and a Taipei City Councillor. My sincere thanks to Vincent for taking the time to chat with us during this very busy election season. We've also linked Vincent's recent article in The Diplomat in the Dive Deeper section of our blog. After our interview, on November 20th, William Lai officially named Chao Bi-khim as his running mate for the 2024 election. Chao has been Taiwan's representative to the United States, based in Washington, D.C. since 2020. She has brought great visibility to Taiwan in that role and has famously proclaimed in the past that she would combat China's aggressive wolf warrior diplomacy with her own brand of cat warrior diplomacy. At the time of recording, William Lai and Chao Bi-khim still lead in the polls. However, the gap between the DPP and KMT is closing, following the failure of the Pan-Blue Alliance with the TPP and the dropping out of Foxconn founder Terry Guo. We've linked Courtney Donovan-Smith's latest analysis in Taiwan News, as well as additional reference material on our blog site at pwneilo.com if you'd like to dive deeper. But that's where we leave it for now. Don't forget to join us for the next episode in this series, when we'll focus on the opposition party candidate Ho Yo-i from the KMT. In the meantime, feel free to share, like and follow us on your favorite social media platform. And as always, thank you for listening. 再见.